Well, it's 5 minutes past. I think we can start. We have only 1 hour and a lot to talk about. So, um, first of all, welcome to Access Partnership webinar on interoperability and the future of the metaverse. My name is Paula Havakov, and I'm a policy manager here at Access Partnership. Today, I'm the moderator for the webinar today. This webinar is part of AP's Metaverse Policy Lab. I don't know how many of you have joined our previous webinars, but we've had 3 so far. This one is the fourth. And the Metaverse Policy Lab is a platform that Access Partnership created at the beginning of the year to engage thought leaders like the ones we have here today with different backgrounds and from different areas of expertise, so we can, together and through different lenses, talk about the different issues and why not think of solutions to the many questions that arise as we start thinking and also talking of the metaverse. Today's dialogue is about interoperability, and I've been trying to get this word for right for 1 week now. I'm sure I'm going to get it wrong at some point, so I'm just going to say beforehand, everyone won't be surprised. We'll be addressing some questions such as what is interoperability? Is interoperability key to the metaverse? What are the challenges involved? How can we address them? And what are the opportunities as well that come with interoperability in the metaverse? The idea is to have this webinar as dynamic and conversational as the ones we had before. So we have a brief keynote presentation from our speakers, followed by a debate between them, and then we have 15 minutes, maybe even more, for Q&A. For everyone with questions, please write them down in the chat, and we'll try to get to them and address as many as possible. Also, it's worth saying that metaverse is really a new concept for everyone. It's a concept in the making, and there are absolutely no right answers at this moment. So feel free to ask whatever you like and also share your opinion freely. There should be a safe space for everyone to say whatever you have in your head. We also invite you to respond to the poll we created to have a sense of people's opinion on how critical interoperability is to the metaverse. I think you'll be able to see the poll in the chat, if I'm not mistaken. So to kick off this talk, maybe we should start saying that interoperability is often described as a key component to the metaverse. And what does that really mean? So for users, an interoperable metaverse means they will be able to jump from one world, from one platform to another without having to switch avatars, so their identity in the metaverse, wallets, or assets. And to bring this into more color, we can think of an example, very, very simple one. So for instance, if I visit a shop in a particular metaverse and I buy this, the shirts, the interoperable avatar, Paula, in the metaverse would be able to wear the same shirt in an entirely different metaverse. So in very simple words, interoperability can be described as this ability to unify economies, avatars, and systems across the different metaverses. But of course, this does not come without its challenges. So the metaverse technology has different building blocks, and interoperability will have different layers. So if we think of infrastructure and hardware components, such as the VR glasses, if I buy a pair of VR glasses, can I enter any metaverse, or do I need different VR glasses to join different metaverses? But also from a software application perspective, we would need standards, protocols to allow for content, experiences, user wallets, storage, database solution, and then lots of different other things to become interoperable. And all of this relates to technological interoperability, but that's not even only that. From a policy standpoint, how can we ensure that the terms of use, the privacy standards, privacy rules, safety guidelines are appropriate to the new technologies and effective in keeping people safe across these different ecosystems and metaverses platforms? So given the importance that it's being given to interoperability, there are some efforts to create standards for the metaverse, but they are very much at the beginning. The Metaverse Standards Forum, of which Access Partnership is a very proud member, is an example of this effort to establish shared best practices and standards to ensure that the user experience across platforms are consistent. This is one example of such forum, and there are others. So while these are very welcome initiatives, how can also ensure that this process is inclusive? And which incentives do we need in place to make the different stakeholders that are of this value chain participate, be part of this discussion, and more importantly, abide by the standards that are agreed upon? Now, and before I take too much time of this conversation, let me pass the mic to the speakers. It would be great if you could please first introduce yourselves and then share your first impression on the metaverse, your first reactions to the topic, and whatever else you like. Maybe Jason, you would like to kick off?
Sure, thank you so much. Well, hello everybody. I'm Jason Matisow. I'm the General Manager of Microsoft's Corporate Standards Group. I'd like to thank the Access Partnership and their Metaverse Policy Lab for inviting me to join today. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to it. To follow up with Paulo's opening comments, a great place to start is to level set on what interoperability is, and then that helps us understand why we're talking about standards in this context. The simplest definition of interoperability that I can think of is that it's about diverse systems being able to communicate with each other to enable common elements of functionality or to exchange data. And this concept is no different for the metaverse than it is for, or has been for computing or telecommunications or other technologies over time. And interop is enabled by many things, and standards tend to be a common focus of the discussion, but it's really important to note that it is not the only way that interoperability is enabled. Private business partnerships and contractual agreements between organizations can establish mechanisms for interop. Interop can be enabled through collaborative development and the use of common implementations such as open source software technologies. And then, of course, interop can be achieved through standardization as well. So that brings us then to a standard, and what is it? Because we use that word a lot, and in fact, people use the word standard to mean many, many different things. But again, to reduce it to its most simple form, a standard in this context of discussion is a specification that was created in a multi-stakeholder organization. But in truth, it's a stack of paper, or it's a digital file. It is not the technology itself. The specification describes what should happen, but not how it should happen. And that enables many, many different implementers to build their own version of that specification. Also, standards organization is, its function is that it establishes the rules that protect the contributors, the participants, and the implementers' interests, and that's what enables the system to function. So this, ultimately, this is how we connect our phones to our cars via Bluetooth. It's how email systems from different providers can exchange messages. It's how the internet functions. And so the standards underpin just about every aspect of the technological world, but they don't define the limits of the technological world. They create a basis, they create a starting point, and it's the innovation above and beyond the standard that tends to be the richest functionality that everybody then enjoys. So how does this relate to the metaverse? In some ways, the avatar conversation that was just shared, I would take it a little differently, and I can't help myself but to ask a simple question, which is, how would a magic warrior dwarf purchase a super carrier war spaceship? Right? It's a screwy question, but it's instructive. If you were playing in EverQuest, a fantasy-based game of dragons and missions, and it's a medieval world, the individual has an online avatar, and they might have that characteristics might be that it does magic, it's a dwarf, it's a warrior, whatever it might be. That individual, though, is collecting experience, they're earning capabilities, and they accumulate digital wealth, goods, things like magic swords, or I don't know, and gold pieces. But they're paying Sony a monthly subscription fee to be part of that universe. And as a member of that community, they might also have a reputation that they build, which affects how other players interact with them. for buying and selling goods in the open market within that game. But what if I also wish to play EVE Online, which is a space-based future fantasy game with spaceships and galaxies and space battles? They're also a place where you would pay a subscription to be part of that universe, and you would also have capabilities and assets, but I don't have access to the money or goods that I earned in the other game. I also don't have the reputation that I may have earned through trusted behaviors in an open marketplace there that the community in another context would know to trust me as well in a monetary transaction. So in order to interoperate, the companies would need to decide that it was in their shared interest to have communication between these two worlds. Effectively, these worlds could be considered walled gardens. They're both businesses. So they might need to establish a protocol for identity and reputation. They might need to think about the transfer and conversion mechanisms for money. These could be accomplished by private agreement and private development between just those two entities, but that would then limit the reach of that work to every other massive multiplayer game out there. So they might turn instead to standardization for that. But in thinking about interoperability between many of the games, the advantage for them might be the growth of the overall gaming market, but some of these decisions might encourage customers of theirs to leave their game and not come back and take their digital wealth with them. And so the business context sets in and starts to establish how they think about whether or not they would join standardization in a given context. But I think a more likely scenario for them would be they might want to encourage standardization for immersive hardware or different mechanisms that augment the value of their gaming environment. And they were looking for ways to have their environment be a more compelling experience for their customers. But it would help their customers to have a broader range of choices of devices that they could use. And they would rather not constrain any one customer to just one type of device to be there. And so they might jump in and really get involved in a bunch of standardization for devices, or they might choose to stay away from things that were perceived not to be as beneficial from a business perspective. Again, these are trade-offs within that context. Yet this example also leads us into a much more difficult or harder set of topics of how regulations apply when what management practices might be standardized for things like cybersecurity or privacy, or the really hard societal issues such as digital safety concerns. None of these platforms, for example, want their technology to be used for child pornography. There are existing standards for some of these types of topics and new work happening in different fora. And many metaverse solutions will run in multiple countries across legal and cultural boundaries. So harmonization of concepts and practices are a critical means for addressing the complexity of these types of issues. So I will wrap up my comments right now just to say interop tends to be a balancing act between openness and marketplace competition. Consumers and organizations alike benefit from strong competition and innovative solutions, both in terms of features, but also in terms of value. That consumers and organizations also benefit from interop that enables a common baseline, but does not block the advancement of the state of the art of technology. And finally, standardization should never be an absolute. What I mean by this is that standards should be used along with open source software, along with regulatory considerations and management practices and commercial arrangements. It's through a blended strategy that we'll see a metaverse evolve and meet market needs, but also be responsive to regulatory requirements. So thank you again, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Jason. So just for everyone to know, Jason is General Manager of Corporate Standards at Microsoft, and he really knows what he's talking about. So that was super interesting, and it's really a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for laying the ground for the discussion that it's going to follow. The truth is that I agree. I think interoperability standards and protocols are already very difficult concept to fully grasp if you're not working entirely with it. So very much appreciated. William, now if you could please introduce yourself to our audience, and also it would be very great to hear your initial thoughts and reactions on the topic.
Of course. Thank you so much, Paula. And hello to everyone. I'm William Webb. I'm the CTO, Chief Technology Officer at Access Partnership. I've also had a fairly long career that's involved quite a lot of futurology and future forecasting. So I've been looking at how these kind of things unfold over many years, and indeed run a standards body as well in the Internet of Things space myself. So what do I think? Well, I think in general interoperability is a good thing, so I'm absolutely not arguing against it. But my question here is, why do we see it as so important to the metaverse? It's often put up there as one of the three main planks to what the metaverse is, along with an immersive environment and sort of the sustainability of the environment, such that when you go back to it, it's the same as when you left it, and alongside that, interoperability. And it feels to me that it's nowhere near the top three. I might put it in the top 20 perhaps, but not the top three. So let me talk a bit about why I think it's of some value, but not critically important. And I'll caveat this by saying that as Jason has very well made the point, there's many different types of interoperability, and hardware interoperability is pretty important. We don't want to end up in a world where if you want to enter one particular metaverse or gaming environment, you need one kind of VR headset. If you want to go to a different one, you need a different kind of VR headset. But I don't worry about that, because that's not the world at the moment. There are many different gaming environments, and you don't have to buy a separate headset or computer or hardware application in order to enter those. So it feels to me that we're not in too much danger of a world where hardware incompatibility is the key issue. So we're coming back more to overall interoperability and what's the value of that. And I love Jason's example. I wish I could talk more about swords and fighting dragons and so on. Sadly, that's not my world. But my example is somewhat different, perhaps also instructive. So I'm quite a keen cyclist, and I do quite a lot in the winter of virtual world cycling. And you can set up a trainer and you can engage through a screen or a tablet or whatever with all sorts of virtual worlds. And I can go and I can ride my bike in a virtual London or up a virtual mountain, interact with other people, my friends or others who I've arranged to meet for that particular environment, and do all sorts of things, race or whatever. It's not a VR application, but it might as well be, for the extent that it feels pretty immersive. And there's no interoperability between about 6 different applications. So there, for those of you who use it, there's Zwift is the main one that many people use. There's plenty of others. Does that worry me? Not in the least. I don't care about the fact that the virtual kit that I wear in one application isn't available in another one. That's really irrelevant. I don't even care too much about the fact that actually I might need to press a different key if I want to change my view from one to the other. I simply use whichever one feels like the right one for me at the time, because it adds value to my experience. And yes, maybe it would be 1% better if they were fully interoperable, but that's not the key driver between wanting to use different ones. And it's never stopped me thinking to myself, oh, I'll try this new application. Oh no, perhaps I won't, because I can't have the same helmet or the same bicycle that I had in a different one. These things are of relatively little importance compared to what the application actually offers me, how much it costs per month, all those other kinds of things that seem to be much more important than interoperability. So I struggle a bit with all these statements that I hear that people say, well, it's critical. Why? And that's the question that I haven't yet had a really good answer to, as to what this criticality is. What will really not happen if we don't have this interoperability? And I think to some degree it comes back to the question of, what do we think that the metaverse is? If it's the metaverse, then that's a singular definition. We're not, it's not the metaverse is, it's the metaverse. If there's one metaverse, then there's no need for interoperability. There's only one. Therefore, there's only one place. You don't need to interoperate between it. If there are multiple different ones, then they surely exist because they bring different attributes, in which case, to Jason's point, one's a gaming environment with a dragon and others with a spaceship. What's the point of interoperability between those two? They're different things. You don't need interoperability as such because you're doing quite different things in them. And if that's where we're going, then interoperability maybe isn't important, or maybe isn't even sensible or possible, to Jason's very good point about that. I think as well we should be cognizant of the fact that it's really hard to achieve this. So to Paula's example, if we want to interoperate a different shirt, how do you define a shirt in such a way that every different environment knows exactly how to represent it? There's so many different attributes it could have. It's really quite difficult to sit down and design a way to ensure that that's fully captured. Are you going to have some kind of, meta language that says, well, it's got this many buttons down the front, it's this color, it's got a collar this big, it's got shirt sleeves this long, or are you going to have a full, type of JPEG bitmap of it? If so, how's that going to work? How's it going to represent itself on different types of avatars? It's really complicated. This is not some kind of trivial issue, and that's just something like a shirt. And it feels to me that there's so many other questions, so many other challenges, that may be a misdirection of effort. And I think, it's a point that Jason has also made to some degree, that there's always a balance between standardization and innovation. So if you fully standardize everything, then there's no room for innovation, because you have to absolutely adhere to that particular standard. And if we're in a situation where we're in a very stable world, we've got to the end game, then that makes sense. There's not much more innovation to happen. Everyone knows what's going on, and stability and interoperability becomes more important. But at the start, innovation is much more important. And I can imagine a situation where we standardize what an avatar looks like, and then someone comes up with a fantastic new idea for a different kind of avatar that's much better than what we had before, but they can't use it because it doesn't fit the standard, and therefore all innovation and all kind of progress is stopped, or at least dramatically slowed, by that standardization process. And we need to weight the benefits of standardization against the benefits of innovation. And as I said, typically what you find at the start of a new concept is innovation is more important. And then over time, as it stabilizes, standardization becomes more important. And that's typically a 5 to 10 year shift. So we may be quite some time away from that. So I think to summarize, where would I leave it? I would leave it by throwing the question back to the audience. What is this criticality about interoperability? What is it that's about a lack of interoperability that will prevent the metaverse from happening? Because this appears to be the perceived wisdom, and I don't yet understand what that is, other than a vague statement that if we don't have it, the metaverse won't happen. And that's where I'd like to leave it. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you so much, William. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Also useful to listen your thoughts and on this, and understand what sort of other challenge we still need to face. Now, Pedro, my Brazilian compatriot, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paula. Thank everyone who helped making this event happen here. So let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Pedro. I am a law and political economy professor from Brazil. I'm also a PhD candidate in media and comms, and with a thesis based on the open internet, and also a partner in media technology and data protection at Batista Luz Advogados, Batista Luz Attorneys. Yes, I do a lot of things, but I will start with a phrase that I once heard from a venture capitalist, and it's quite famous right now. The phrase is, Web3 is the key to the metaverse. I disagree with this phrase, and I would start with interoperability is the key to the metaverse. As Paula said, it's very hard to say this word as a Brazilian Portuguese speaker. I will try my best here, but please excuse me for something that I will say. Okay, let's start with this. I'm very skeptical about the concept, so I will start with something that Jason said. The metaverse is not that different from virtual realities, and more specifically, virtual worlds. It's a concept that started in the 70s. This is not a new concept. Everybody knows here Second Life, which was very popular in the 2000s, but also online RPG games emerged in this time, like World of Warcraft, and they were very popular. Nowadays, we have Elder Scrolls, we have Fortnite, we have Minecraft. All these can be interpreted as a metaverse. And even porn industry did some things even 20 years ago. So in my point of view, metaverse is mostly a rebranding of virtual worlds. The word, just to have curiosity, first appeared in a novel. The novel Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. It's in the early 90s. It was not a bestseller, but Meta, successfully. Yes, it's success. Use the road to promote their rebranding and their new products related with VR. So we can say from a communications perspective that metaverse is also a buzzword. As a buzzword, it ignites an imaginary. In the same way, steam engines spurred technological developments and promotes the foundations of modernity, he also promoted utopias, fantasy things like steampunks. And the TCP/IP created the internet and also the digital culture that we do a lot of things about that. But people do not buy products only because they are functional, but because they have a meaning. They are part of an imaginary. Think about Marvel. Each consumer transaction in this case involves consumption, narratives. It's like imaginary that the seller sells and the consumer will buy this to build their own imaginary about this thing. So what we're seeing right now is that we're seeing a buzzword, and this buzzword is creating an imaginary about new things, about new opportunities, and about new developments that should be made. This is great. This is great because we can do a lot of things in the technical perspective. We can do a lot of things in the business perspective, and it might spur a cultural change that Second Life was not able to do in the early 2000s. And nowadays we have these virtual realities, these virtual roads, very close to the game industry, but not close to the social media industry. I think the danger about metaverse and this expression is to oversimplify things. As my colleague said, it's a very complex matter, especially if you want really to call this word in the singular. I also agree that there are metaverses nowadays. It's The Sims, Elder Scrolls, Fortnite, Minecraft, Meta initiatives. We don't have the metaverse. We have seen Web3 supporters kind of free riding on the concept, saying that they own the concept and the key to the metaverse is doing everything the Web3 is. But that does not make sense, because you can have interoperability also out from the crypto road. Most initiatives that are made nowadays in the crypto roads, in the Web3, something like that, because I don't believe in this concept, are initiatives that work as walled gardens, such as Minecraft, such as Elder Scrolls. It is supported by VCs indeed, because everybody's trying to be the first in the market. Nobody in the market is really interested right now in doing something interoperable like that. Sorry about that. But it wants to be the first, because the market, the social media market, the network economy works a lot like a winner takes it all logic. So everybody wants to be the same, the first. So if we want to have a metaverse in the singular, we need to have interoperability. We need to exchange goods, exchange virtual goods between roads, between platforms. We need avatars that can move between roads. I can move my avatar from Elder Scrolls to Minecraft or something like that. But as I said in the beginning, I'm kind of skeptical, because this depends on the industry. It's very, very hard to achieve from a technical perspective, but it's also very hard to achieve from a market perspective. So I think the debate here will change a lot in the next years. Of course, we will have something, we may have something like a Wikipedia kind of thing emerging with the users doing their own metaverses. But the market right now is very different from early 20s. We have more concentration, we have new initiatives, we have concentration of both in the applications layer, but before that, we have concentration on the investment, on the venture capital side. So it will be really hard to do something that will really catch the users and put them together to do interoperable markets with different roads being exchanged, different goods being exchanged, and everybody gaining something of that. So again, I'm skeptical, but I think it's a challenge. Everybody knows that maybe there are not the skepticals. There are those who buy the imaginaries and want to build in the Mesmers. And I believe that these guys will have a great challenge and they might succeed in the next years. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you so much, Pedro. So to kick off the debates, I would like maybe to pass for our first question. So we've been reading a lot as well that a metaverse that optimizes creator opportunities will only exist if there is collaboration between a diverse range of actors. I think we all agree with that in the sense that creators will benefit from an interoperable metaverse because their creations and their investments will become technology agnostic, and they will transcend the limitations. They will go beyond the limitation of specific platforms. But maybe other players of this value chain will have different incentives. Some even may not even have incentives at all, like Jason was saying. And this also might be one of the challenges of achieving interoperability. So, Jason, in your opinion, what are the opportunities that interoperability brings to users, creators, developers, product designers, content creators, and the many different players involved in the metaverse?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I actually want to go back to a comment that William made and Pedro was touching on. So far in this conversation, it's been really easy for us to all to focus on consumer scenarios because that's the one that comes to mind. It's fun to talk about a dwarf and a dragon and a spaceship, fine. But the reality is there's the enterprise side of this discussion as well. And you start talking about, the enterprise uses of digital twins. And if you take a real estate scenario, let's say you have a business and has a campus of 20 buildings and you want to build a digital twin of that and you want to do all kinds of different interesting things, with thinking about the management of such a facility, you're going to have vendors from different industries that all want to compete for access to participate in that digital twin context. You're going to have everything from elevator companies to power systems to food services in the commercial kitchens and things of the sort. And that a closed universe, if you think of a metaverse conversation where there's no interoperability, starts to make that scenario very, very difficult, A. But B, you start getting into these discussions about what does vendor lock-in mean? What does having an inability to share data to leverage for AI learning and being able to think about what you get from machine learning outcomes from shared data sources. And also competition laws starting to increasingly look at the role of industrial or commercial data, non-personal data in the role of market competition. And I think that metaverse standardization will get tied up in this as well. And so Paula, to your question, you then start to look at the different actors in a scenario of the metaverse, and you're going to have creators, and creators tend to be people who are not producing the platform, but who wish to make use of a platform for their economic opportunity. Well, that's an interesting dynamic between those people who are, Microsoft makes Windows, for example, but people who make applications are the creators that run on Windows. Okay, well, that's a set of relationships. If you have, people who are seeking to be brokers of different things, you have actors who might be doing reselling, you have marketplace companies that wish just to be the aggregator and creating eBay-like auction services or whatever else it might be. So I think you've touched on a really important point that the richness of the ecosystem may well be dependent on a combination of interoperable and non-interoperable functions, because that creator doesn't want somebody necessarily to monetize their creation and they get no benefit from it. So they may choose to try and use different means to say, hey, my thing is unique. And it could be the use of blockchain technologies or things that are immutable. It might be different things that they go after to protect their opportunity and or to expand the use of their system in a different way. And a creator can, I don't wish to say that all creators want things to be closed and proprietary, because they don't. Sometimes the best thing for the creator is that as many people as possible take and modify the thing that they started with. So I don't think it's a one size fits all discussion. And I think we do need to be very careful whenever we get into these things, not to get too wrapped up in video games, because, Minecraft is, I get it. Okay. I see it on the screen, or Zwift is an experience that I too, William, spend my time in that world. You've probably beaten me. You look like you're much faster than me. But the point is that we have to be really thoughtful about the different types of scenarios we're talking about. And then those actors will have very different motivations, and interop may be essential to protecting certain types of interactions as opposed to just enabling them. And so you have sort of many factors there.
Thank you so much, Jason. William, would you like to maybe share your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my thinking is that I'm not sure we're at a point yet where we can say that independent content creation is critical for the metaverse. I don't look at the world and say, well, there's 6 metaverses out there, and I would visit them, but because I can't take content from one to another, then actually I'm not going to visit any of them. It seems like we're still a long way away from that. We still haven't even really thought through what the metaverse is, what it's about, why we go there, what we do with it, and why we might have even a content creation at all within it. So it's not a bad idea, of course, that there's some kind of capability, but it doesn't, again, to my original point, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have interoperability, but just that it doesn't feel at this point in time that it's the constraining or the key critical factor. The other thing I point out by analogy is, as an example, we don't have interoperability between handsets. Apple and Android are 2 quite different operating systems and 2 quite different handsets, and yet applications manage to become available for both because it's worth their while modifying their applications. And indeed, there's all sorts of systems out there that help you write an app and then port it to both of those environments. So there's all sorts of ways of overcoming a lack of interoperability, and it certainly hasn't stopped the mobile phone world becoming incredibly successful. The fact that there is not true interoperability between Apple iOS and Android. So it's a good thing, but let's pause and ask ourselves, how good is it? And is it the factor that's really stopping the metaverse taking off at this point in time? Why don't we have everyone spending 3 hours a day on the metaverse right now? I suspect the answer is not that content creators can't port content from one metaverse to another. There's a whole load of much more fundamental issues that we need to solve before we get to the time where that becomes a problem.
Fair enough. That's good points, William. I'm gonna have to I'm not gonna be able to ask everyone the same questions because we're a bit short on time. But I also like moving now from challenges and not moving from the technological challenges, but going for more a policy governance standpoint. I'd like to ask Pedro, what would you say are the main challenges from this policy, from a policy perspective? How can we ensure that debates of interoperability, whether it's critical or not, but it's as inclusive as possible? And how can we foster interoperability, because it is a good thing, right? And are consortiums like the Metaverse Standards Forum the right approach? So if you can,
we have agree with you.
Just we're a bit short on time, but so I'm gonna have everyone to be a bit more succinct in their response. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. I can also answer in the beginning Daniel's question. Is the metaverse the branding equivalent to the flying cars from the Jacksons? I don't think it's that simple, but I would add that is most like a big data or Web3 is a concept. It oversimplifies something that is very complex. It has important function in society because society would not understand very complex terms, and it's okay, that happens. So when you encapsulate these things in a word, in a branding words, yes, you can have positive implications in the society. But as I said, the risk is to oversimplify this in a matter that can mostly confuse users, confuse consumers, instead of helping them to understand the environment. So just to give a quick question here to Daniel, but asking about Paula's question, I think the regulation and policy issues about metaverse are very similar to the ones we have in the overall internet right now. So we have challenges about data protection, we have challenges about taxation, we have challenges about moderation and platforms liability. So these are things that are being discussed in every country and are being discussed for many sectors within the internet industry. So I think it will be mostly the same things that we will see. Okay, we'll add a virtual reality component, but I don't think that this will be something that will change a lot the regulatory landscape. And I will add something. We are living in an era, in an age that mostly we are hyper-regulating things. So whenever there's a new technology, we say, let's regulate this, let's regulate this. It is happening right now with AI. It is happening right now with platforms in general. So I'm kind of against this trend because I think we have the tools and we have the law to say that we can do a more general regulation that don't affect necessarily innovation. That's my concern right now. But as I said, I don't think we need a metaverse law or a metaverse approach to public policy. I think we need to put this in context of the overall internet, because there is not right now something that will really detach from the problems that we have right now.
Thank you, Pedro. Just seeing if we have time for another question, or if we should maybe open the floor for Q&A. I think we see a lot of hands up. So
let's hear from the audience.
Yeah, exactly. Let's open the floor for the audience. Dean, Bubbly, I see you have your hands up. Feel free to open your camera if you want and ask the question.
Hi there. I didn't realize I actually had my hand up, but it was more just to sort of understand if the consumer metaverse applications and enterprise metaverse applications, whether it makes any sense to mandate interoperability, simply because the experiences may be so different. There's not going to be a singular metaverse experience. It's metaverse with a lowercase m rather than the metaverse. Why would you need interoperability between, I don't know, a digital twin of a factory or a mine with a game of Minecraft, for example?
I think maybe Jason would be a right person to answer this, because I know where those answer.
Well, I guess, Dean, thank you. And I'll defer also to the others. I think that the one word that you used there that I think is a challenge is mandate. That's the one that I would say, is that I don't think interop should be mandated. I think it's a function of market dynamics. So I could produce a mobile phone today that does not support 5G. There's nothing that stops me from producing a mobile phone. A beautiful flat device, I could put it together and call it the Jason phone and put it out there. And if it doesn't connect to any other device, nobody's going to buy it. So, but nobody would say to me, you can't market a phone. Like, there are kids' phones that are made of candy that are marketed all the time. Everybody knows they're not a phone, but it might look like a phone. So the point that I'm trying to get at is this word mandate is a critical one. I'm being silly, but we run into problems when you start getting into, especially in a leading edge new technology space, where you start mandating behaviors, because what you're doing is you're actually creating a blockage to what is innovation and not opening up new innovation. Whereas the market dynamics of take something like a communication standard, Bluetooth as an example. Think about the richness of the ecosystem that got created when near field communications and radio got used in a different way. And there are now 40,000 companies in Bluetooth, not individuals, companies that are in the Bluetooth forum. And it has opened up this huge thing, but nobody says you must support Bluetooth. But it does create this huge market. It's a market maker dynamic. So that's where I would come down on that question, is just sort of to say, I worry about this concept when we start talking metaverse, where everybody says, well, you must have this. Well, yeah, be careful there. And I don't think that's what you were advocating, but that's the word that I would be focused on.
Dean, I don't know if you're saying something, but I can't hear you.
Okay.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't advocating it. I was almost like drawing a parallel with, the discussion, for example, at the moment in Europe about messaging services being mandated to interoperate, which I think is nonsensical, given each user experience is very different, with ephemeral messaging or emojis of different sorts or avatars. So I think that's a really instructive example. Actually, I think the interesting case, you talk about Bluetooth, of course, because Bluetooth uses unlicensed spectrum, where you're free to create your own wireless protocol as long as you conform to the licensing rule or the power restrictions. William will know far more about this than I do, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much for your question. William, you want to answer to that?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's great to see you, Dean. Thank you for your question. And I think what you said actually hints at a much more fundamental point that we probably need to answer, which is, you said, well, what about a digital twin compared to a consumer metaverse? And that to me is a much deeper question of, well, is a digital twin a metaverse? Indeed, is anything that's digital a metaverse, or indeed is anything that requires VR headsets a metaverse? If I do virtual surgery on a patient, heaven help the patient, is that the metaverse, or is that just me doing virtual surgery as an application? And depending on how we define the metaverse, then clearly that makes a big difference. So if we defined it purely as, a world where people can get together to discuss various things amongst them that only involves sort of being an avatar and chat, then you could perhaps say, well, then fine, we can have interoperability between those worlds because it's a very, very narrowly defined concept. But if you say, well, it's anything that involves any kind of digital interaction that's slightly more than what we currently have at the moment, including AR, VR, XR, mixed reality, all those kind of things for consumers or for enterprises, then clearly interoperability across all those is just nonsensical because it's such a wide range of different things. And so it does appear to me that actually a really good first step in this whole process would be just defining quite clearly what the metaverse really is, or at least what part of it do we want to wrap interoperability around and say it's important for those areas. And I don't have the answer to that because I think it's still far too vague to me as to what really people mean when they talk about the metaverse.
Thank you, William, for this replica. We have another question, Lucas from Supersphere. I feel like you have your hands up. If you could maybe switch on your camera if you feel comfortable and ask your question, please.
Yeah. Hi, everybody, and Paulo and Pedro, muito prazer. So just as a very quick introduction, I've enjoyed the conversation. Just as a very quick introduction, I'm the CEO of a company called Supersphere, and we've been producing music experiences for metaverses for about 5 years now. We're Meta's primary partner for music experiences in the metaverse as well. And I think there are a couple of things. Number one is that there seems to be, and I think this is a bigger conversation than this call, there seems to be some not confusion, but ongoing discussion about what the metaverse is and what the definition of the metaverse is. My personal touchstones for that are two documents, Matthew Ball's Metaverse Primer and Tony Parisi's Metaverse Rules are at least my personal things that I think explain the metaverse in a way that makes sense to me. As far as the interoperability, I think, William, you talked about, you posed sort of the semi-rhetorical question of, what's it for and why is it necessary? Because we've been producing experiences actively for metaverses for several years, and it's my business. I view the metaverse world right now as like the early days of the internet, when you had Xerox PARC and you had various universities and institutions creating their own rules, and eventually TCP/IP, HTTPS, and the various standards and protocols emerged that connected those worlds, but you still had individual islands of operation. And that's kind of how the web works right now. And I think that's where we are with the various metaverses right now. But the interoperability is absolutely crucial to, for instance, the music world, which is my world, and how we are doing things. And the lack of interoperability that's being addressed by some of the working groups in the Metaverse Standards Org, the lack of interoperability between avatars, between goods and services, between graphical worlds, and the lack of interoperability and being able to move from those platforms is actively hurting adoption. We have an awful lot of people going to the shows that we produce, but then we're working with those artists to be able to transition those shows to potentially other places, and we can't. And that's an active pain point. So I think that there's a decision to be made on what is interoperable and what needs to transition between those different worlds. And every company is going to have their own island of IP that they want to protect, obviously, to give them an advantage. But I see it as an absolutely necessary step. And you were asking, why is it necessary? Is it really necessary? And I suppose that's just my answer, is that for me, the defining line is not, is it necessary? It's what is necessary and where do we stop proprietary IP versus something that needs to be shared. And interested in your thoughts on that. But thanks very much for bringing me up and allowing me to ask. I love the group and think it's an important mission.
Thank you so much, Lucas. I think we were talking about it yesterday. I think external interoperability can happen by degrees, and it will. Maybe William, do you want to take on this one just to hit the debate?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you, Luca. And that was a great example, and it's really valuable to hear that and to hear from people like yourselves who are right in the heart of what's going on. I absolutely take on board what you say. I guess the question for me would be, so where's that pain point really manifesting itself? So what, for example, I can imagine a world where there's a metaverse for people who want to go to concerts or experience music, and that's the main point you go to. Back to my example of Zwift. If I want to listen to music in that, well, I put my headphones on. It may not be that important to have interoperability across that one. Is every metaverse one where there's going to be a virtual concert or whatever, or not? Does that apply? How does that apply to Jason's example, to some sort of a gaming environment or whatever? I don't know the answers to that. The other question, the other factor, I guess, is that there are existing approaches that they probably merge into something that may be useful for various entities. But it's a really great case study to bring forward, and I think perhaps points the way to perhaps looking at individual things and saying, is this something that we perhaps should try and standardize more about? And it certainly feels to me that music may be much more valuable and tractable than avatars clothing, for example.
There's something I would jump in there also on Lucas's, is that you do get to the, we mentioned it very briefly in this conversation, but I think it's really important. There's a difference, for example, in the use of standards to achieve the interop and the use of, say, open source software to achieve the idea of single implementation with broad adoption, but with massive input from lots of contributors, is a form of collaborative outcome that enables interop and enables cross-platform experiences. That's very different than lots of contributions into a single specification and then many different implementations, where those implementations may then introduce unique features that then block interoperability above and beyond. And we have all, living in the standards world or living in the tech industry for a long time, have seen plenty of examples of both scenarios working and both scenarios not working. And so I do think that at the heart of it will be some mix of behaviors that will contribute to it, because I don't think we all want to live in a vanilla technology world. I don't think everybody wants to see a single metaverse that is only with a single set of features and nothing beyond what is in that environment. So then they'll start to, you start to look for deviations, and you look for different mechanisms to achieve that split between what is common and what is not common. And that's where I think the heart of the rub really comes down to the business opportunities and the different motivations of the actors involved. So I also appreciate Lucas's comments.
Yeah, that was very interesting, Lucas. Thank you very much. We're already 2 minutes to the hour, but I want to give the floor to Sumaya, talking about more of the policy side as well. Sumaya, I don't know if you want to ask the question yourself. You want to turn on your camera. If you're still there, actually, might be there. Oh, hello.
Yeah, I am still there. Thank you. I think this question was intended towards Pedro. Thank you. I really enjoyed what you had to say. I'm just curious about, because I remember from the chat, there's some discussions about whether the metaverse can really fully be classified as even the internet, if it's also just gaming seen completely separately. I understand there's a lot we need to understand about what the metaverse is to define it. But when you were talking about regulation, I suppose is internet regulation that's currently available, is that sufficient for when it comes to safely allowing people to access the metaverse?
Pedro, you're on mute. Just
Okay, I'm on mute as everybody in the road. Okay, now it's okay. So I will change your question, Sumaya, asking something. Is the internet regulation enough for the world right now? Is it satisfactory? I don't think so, because mostly of the regulations were made in the 90s or early 20s, and we have a different scenario with big techs, with different competition issues, etc. And also we have taxation issues, jurisdiction issues that were far more different than what we had in the 90s and 20s. And also we have hyper-regulation issues that, in my opinion, they are not achieving their means, what they propose to achieve, like GDPR. So I would say that metaverse regulation for metaverse is not sufficient, as well as regulation for the internet. Once we define, once we resolve, once we advance on the issues regarding regulation of the overall internet, my opinion is that we will also address things that would happen in the metaverse. I don't think there's the need right now for a specific issue about metaverse.
Great, thank you, Pedro.
So I think it's time to wrap up. I just want to ask, I think we have the results of the poll, and I'm curious to know what our audience thinks. It's 1 sec, sorry. So for 64% of our audience, interoperability is critical to the success of the metaverse. For 8%, not that important. For 2%, VR and AR handsets are more important than interoperability. And for 23%, feeling safe in the metaverse is more important. So I feel like the consensus, I mean, it's not a consensus, but the majority still thinks that interoperability is key to the metaverse. Maybe we have to have a second round of this debate, bring more people to share their views, because it was certainly very interesting to see the other side of the story. I want to thank you again, everyone, our speakers, for being part of this debate. It was certainly too short to talk about a lot of stuff, but Access Partnership and Metaverse Policy Lab, we're constantly doing other events, and we're gonna be sharing the recording of this video and the other events that are to come in our social media. So thank you again for everyone, and I will see you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye all. Thanks everyone.
Bye. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.